The Boys cast has some of the best actors in all of television. Antony Starr's insane speeches, Erin Moriarty's heartfelt cries. But how did these actors become so good? Well, to answer that, let's review each actor's past roles and see how their acting skills developed over time. And yo, trust me guys, some of these actors' past jobs you'd never ever expect. Like A-Train was in Hannah Montana, Hughie was in Hunger Games. Spoilers. For now, sweethearts, let's start it off with Jack Quaid, an actor that very much deserves his spot in The Boys, but let's just say he got a much better spawn point than a lot of these other actors. His spawn point being his parents, Meg Ryan and Dennis Quaid, two very successful actors that already had roles in movies like Scream, Oppenheimer, and so many old classics. So I hope you guys don't freak out when I tell you his first ever acting role at 20 years old was in Hunger Games. Yes, the Hunger Games. And he played a character known as Marvel. Unlike the rest of the cast, you can see that acting was in his DNA. His first role already had great moments like the green screen interview, where he's purposely stuttering over words, confidently making hand gestures.
Ever since I was a little kid, I'd watch these games.
And overall had this assertive level of aura that others simply didn't. A couple years later, at around 23 years old, he'd land a very versatile role in Logan Luck, showing us how well-rounded he was already becoming so fast. But his best learning experience was yet to come, because 2 years after that, he'd land a massive role in a movie known as Tragedy Girls as Jordan. Here, instead of the confident acting he learned earlier, he'd be forced to understand how shy acting worked. He'd be a lot more reserved, and as you can see, he'd use his cheeks to show nervousness, exactly how he does it now in The Boys. So although this movie got a 6 out of 10 in IMDb, it taught him that really crucial, nervous, shy nature that he very much needed as Hughie in The Boys, which is why there's no surprise 2 years after Tragedy Girls, The Boys Amazon Prime would call him up. And thanks to his calm nature but also aggressive confidence when needed, he was the perfect man to fill Hughie. Now Jack Quaid certainly had an easier rise to the top, but a lot of these other actors in The Boys very much didn't. Karen Fukuhara is the best example. She was also born in Los Angeles, but she had much more humble beginnings. She was a waitress, she was a subtitle editor, she was a translator, she's done it all. And after barely graduating university with a minor in theater, no one would ever expect what her first role would be. Can you take a guess, sweethearts? Can you? Suicide Squad. The biggest movie of 2016. But how is that possible? How is it possible that an ex-waitress with no past experience lands this big of a role? Well, it's because I didn't mention how obsessed with martial arts she was. She'd been doing karate since middle school, so she was fluent in combat. And on top of that, her mom put her in Japanese classes for 11 entire years. So it's safe to say this combination of skills was still very rare to come across. And if it wasn't for these two things, who knows if she would have even got in. But now in Suicide Squad as Katana, she would build her acting foundation, and you can analyze the fact that scenes like this, how she was already capable of bringing out such great emotion. Even the comments under this clip, some people literally say this was the most emotional scene in the entire movie. And on top of that, the Kimiko we now love in The Boys, she has this very serious look when she gets mad. Turns out in Suicide Squad, she was already working on that look, which tells us from the start, Karen didn't have to work too hard on her eye acting. It was something that came very naturally to her. So just before The Boys would get announced, she'd play one more very deep role as Nori in the movie Stray, which would just further double down on her very serious, high intense acting. So when a spot for Kimiko would open up just 1 year later, even though she's only had a couple years of acting experience up to this point, she was the one for the job. In the comics, Kimiko's name is the female of the species, which is described as an Asian woman that's insanely good at hand-to-hand combat, which is literally the definition of her role as Katana in Suicide Squad. I'm pretty sure that people probably saw her skills in Suicide Squad, and if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't see her as Kimiko today. I know it's crazy, okay? But I'm telling you it's the truth. Baby girls, let's screw these younger little kids. Let's increase our testosterone and talk about Karl Urban, Butcher from The Boys. And let me tell you guys, from the start, you could tell that he was meant to play Butcher. Let me show you guys why by exposing some of his past secret roles. Karl started out as a New Zealand-based actor, and one of his first ever roles was actually with Antony Starr in a TV show known as Xena Warrior Prince. At around 24 years old, he'd played Julius Caesar in the show, and you can already see he's always been the rougher type of actor. Examine the way he's clenching his jaw, the way he looks up at the very end, there's definitely something there. And just a couple years after that, his assertive acting would put him in the Lord of the Rings franchise. This war type of show gave him a very unique acting experience that would teach him a military level of confidence. His character was named Eomer, and in specific moments like his banishment, see that arrogant confidence building up. He also made a very huge leap in vocal acting, like he had a very good raspy voice here.
You have no authority here. Your orders mean nothing.
And Mr. Karl clearly impressed everyone around him because just a couple of years after that, he'd end up in Star Trek. Here, I want you to note how his eye acting took a huge leap. He would constantly involve his eyebrows and widen his pupils to give off a threatening vibe. And in the follow-up movie Star Trek Beyond, he'd also get to adventure into some of the sadder and comedy scenes. He was becoming very well-rounded, and by now, his talent was very much showing, because only 2 years after Star Trek Beyond, he'd make it as the main villain in Thor Ragnarok. He would put on a great performance as usual, such as the scene where he's sacrificing himself, showing off great body language in his fights and some very strong combat. And him being in Marvel clearly put him on another spotlight because it kind of solidified him as the go-to guy when you need someone to be arrogant and a little bit rough. So just a couple years after that, the boys calling him up for Butcher was a no-brainer. Like, let's really think about it. Who could replace him? Who could replace the way how he talks, the way he looks at people, the way he furrows his eyebrows? He has that specific look. But now let's talk about an actor who was kind of guaranteed success. Like, I still love you, baby girl, but you had the acting start that millions of actors only could dream of. And the secret person I'm talking about, we're talking about Erin Moriarty. Erin started acting at 14 years old and somehow landed a role in one of the most famous ABC shows known as One Life to Live. She would act in only a couple episodes, which are so impossible to find, but after aging 5 entire years looking for them, no, like seriously, I was going through mental torture. Mental. I'm literally sitting here, it's 2 a.m, hair's not done, my hair's a mess, and I'm sitting here literally scanning through the whole stupid show, True Detective, trying to find where's Erin Moriarty. Stupid. I hate this video, bro. But I finally found some footage, and the April 15th release shows us some very unique things about her first acting. It's pretty low quality, but you can see she's pausing between her speech and still giving off a respectable amount of snarkiness. And sure, her dialogue itself didn't have much emotion at all. Like, there was no emotion.
Look, you're new here. You need brownie points, right?
But that would all change just 1 year later, where she'd land a guest role in Law & Order SUV. And miraculously, here her subtle acting jumped so much. Now she had all these techniques, like she was quivering her lips to show sadness, along with the way she'd look off to the side, break eye contact. You could see she was much better at showing emotion. Guys, isn't it kind of cool? You could see someone's specialty like 10 years ago, and then now see it in the boys and be like, oh, she was already good at that look. But for now, she carried on in minor TV roles, and it kind of stayed that way for a couple stale years until she hit that very next moment. The moment where she'd act in True Detective. I'm literally not even kidding, a show that is equally as gory as The Boys. So many insane weird things go on here. Me don't like it. Anyways, her being part of this twisted show was so important. Prior to this, she only knew how to play a soft, innocent girl. And she even said in an interview, playing goth was fun for a change because it's the opposite of how I present myself and is the opposite of any role I've been considered for. The fact that she was gothic in the show and she had that sassy attitude, the way she had to fully embody that role, it expanded her skills. So it's no surprise, just 4 years after that, Erin would be casted in The Boys, where the soft, quivering girl is present, but also the gothic one from True Detective. It's that cycle of life, you know? It's like you do this from here, you do it here, you combine it. But next, let's get deep and talk about a man who's probably the most popular in the entire cast by far. Yes, we are talking about Chace Crawford. Now, let me explain why he's easily the biggest. Chace started out his acting career at only 20 years old in a horror movie known as The Coven. This movie itself didn't have much genuine scenes of Chace acting, but it caught the eye of the CW. And no, they didn't cast him as the Flash or Damon Salvatore. He actually became Nate Archibald in Gossip Girl, one of the biggest television shows to ever exist. So in Chase's prime years, from 21 to around 27 years old, he'd work on his acting craft in this show. And in the beginning, as you can see, his body language has always been strong, but his facial acting was very stiff. In season 2, you can see he's slowly getting better at showing emotion, where you can see the lowered eyebrows, the watery eyes, but things just haven't fully poked through yet. And unfortunately, here's the weird twist. Things never actually poke through. He stays this weird, kind of shy character the whole show. All the way into season 6, in the second last episode, here you can see a great example with his dad. The basics are there once again, but it doesn't even come close to competing with the deep we know today. So what happened next? Blood and oil. Blood and oil. Blood and Oil, an ABC show that Chase would act in. 3 years after finishing Gossip Girl, this show would finally bring out his true expression. Like in episode 1x6, he's finally leveled up and he's able to move freely. And this is very important because if you now tie it back to The Boys, the Deep is kind of a non-critical thinker. He's pretty dumb up here, but thanks to Chase's acting in Gossip Girl, he knows how to play an awkward, kind of bland, stiff guy. But now, thanks to Blood and Oil, when needed, he can act out genuinely heartfelt, raw, emotional scenes. Okay, but these actors were cute, funny, whatever. Let's talk about an actor with a very, very unique background. The only Irish actor in the entire cast. And looks like the Irish media was very underground because I can't find any footage of Raw, which is Dominique's very first big role. But it's okay because just 1 year later, she was in the What? The character was dropped from The Philanthropist before it... 2 years after that, we finally see her in Hell of Wheels. Very young into her acting career at just 25 years old, and she was the main character of a 20-episode American Civil War show. Her character goes through a lot of tragedy, and you can highlight many instances where she's vulnerable. But just like Butcher, she also already showed signs of a confident, smirky woman. Her patience has always been the most powerful element of her acting. In this early of a role, you can see she will stay silent in a strict pose for a couple long seconds, just gazing out. Even in The Boys, I've praised how good this specific move is, and now we can see where she got it from. A couple years after that, and she'd move into a show called Astronaut Wives Club as Louise Shepard, a happy wife role that also came with some drama. You can now see Dominique has truly learned how to embody the sadness in a realistic way, and specific scenes like this show it off perfectly. But the reason this role itself mattered so much is because the Astronaut Wives Club was an actual real-life group of 7 women that were married to special astronauts known as the Mercury 7. So Dominique being the main character for a show with this rich of history is what truly pushed her into stardom. She blew up off of the back of these rich historic shows. And this right here gave her the edge to stand out and get casted a year later in House of Cards. Her absolute biggest show yet, that even Barack Obama would become a fan of. But after this show, she suddenly stopped acting for 3 whole years so she could subscribe to my channel and watch all my YouTube videos. So all you baby girls should also subscribe, duh. But after that 3-year break, it was officially 2019 where Dominique would get casted as Maeve. And now if you look backwards, all these beautiful sad scenes, the distant stares in the hospital, all the stiff body language while she smokes a cigarette, it all makes sense and ties together. But guys, I feel like everything's been going a little too smoothly for everyone so far. Like everyone just starts acting and they make it. But what if we talk about an actor who wasn't an actor at all, who had a very completely different profession, and you would literally never expect him to be in The Boys? The person we're talking about is known as Mr. Cheats on Kimiko, aka Frenchie, acted by Tomper Capone. The very unique thing about Tomper was he was a soldier and a squad leader for the Israel Defense Force, and he would maintain this position all the way up until age 26 when he would get his degree in performing arts. Play roles in very small Israel shows like Gullies and Hostages, and of course when I look for footage, I can't find any of it. Great. I love you. The reason those 2 shows were still very important is because they were both very deep political types of shows, and this would give him recognition in the Israel acting space, the space that Natalie Portman was the leader of, because she's the biggest Israeli actor to this date. And after watching those Israeli shows, Natalie is the one that saw talent in him, so he was put in her directed film A Tale of Love and Darkness in 2015. Skimming through the movie, he would only show up 2 times, so it was still a pretty small role, but him sharing the stage with Natalie Portman in romantic scenes like this helped stand him out so much, and his life would never be the same since. 1 year later, he'd get his big break. He would be cast in a movie called 1 Week and a Day. This would be Tomper's first main character role, along with his first non-political type of show. Have you guys noticed how many of these actors start off in their local country, they kind of build a fan base, and then they land main character roles as soon as they exit and go to America? Is that the strategy? Wait, you have to blow up in your hometown and then you travel? What? Anyways, here for the first time, we finally get to see Tomper express himself. Just like Frenchie in The Boys, he played a very light-hearted, relaxed person. His acting was so carefree. For example, his very calm hand motions, the way he rubbed his little nose, it was all so nonchalant, and acting was becoming comfortable for him. And on top of that, the movie showed us the iconic Frenchie smile that he loves to do. So even 8 years ago, he was just working on that little smirk. It's great. But the interesting part is, it's clear Tomper himself has a love for these war type of movies, because after this, he would actually go back into a war movie known as Entebbe, giving him that acting exposure to violent type of scenes, something that would occur many times in The Boys. And Entebbe came out actually at the perfect time, because just 1 year after its release, The Boys would announce its cast, create the perfect storm for Tomper to enter and infiltrate The Boys crew. This next actor, Giancarlo Esposito, who acts Stan Edgar, is the first character we're gonna review that isn't one of the main guys in the show, but he still must be included because he is easily one of the best actors in the show, and I'm not even gonna lie, probably one of the best in all of television. I'm being so serious. Let's break down his history so I can show you guys how talented he is and also the reason behind his success. Firstly, he's old, and as you guys know, these old actors, they hit different. Okay, sorry, chill, sorry, let's get serious. Giancarlo has been in the most shows and movies out of any actor in The Boys by a mile, by so much. So let's only focus on the main moments for today. He started off acting at only 10 years old in Broadway, so long ago that no footage remains.
Why can't I find footage? Why can't I find footage?
And he would dominate and focus on Broadway throughout most of his youth, all the way up until around 1980s. Eventually, he'd land himself in the big screens, landing popular movies for that age like Maximum Overdrive and King of New York. As you can see, even as a 16-year-old, Broadway surely taught him how to have expression. He moves his body well, his face twitches very rapidly in this funny scene, which was still good for that time period. 10 years after that, he'd find his success after he meets a very important man. This man would be a director named Spike Lee, who focused on black community issues, which was the exact category Giancarlo would explode in, making 4 movies with Spike, such as Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X, which was such a huge boost for his name. Now, here's where things get juicy. Because of his popularity in the black culture space, he easily landed a role in the crime drama homicide Life in the Street. His first time ever entering the police/authority type of role, and he would crush it here, showing off strong seriousness and ability to play a professional role very well. He held this role for the longest time out of anything in his career yet, and these type of roles would eventually land him 15 years later after so much hard work in AMC's Breaking Bad. He would play the character Gustavo Fring, and it's known as one of the best acting performances of all time. He was sharp, he was witty, he used his eyes so well to turn on and off that professional image versus that drug lord image. Everything about him just radiated business and confidence. I'm gonna make a video very soon reviewing every actor in Breaking Bad, but for now, just know he crushed it here. And he did so well he'd become a regular in law-related shows, the biggest one being Criminal Minds Suspect Behavior, which only further improved how well he could play this type of role. So when a role for Stan Edgar opened up in The Boys, a CEO professional type of image, who do you think they're gonna call the best? And well, Giancarlo plays him effortlessly. There's so many scenes like this, especially with Homelander, where he has this dead eye look. That robotic feeling you get when he says his dialogue combined with the sudden pauses, oh my god! Just watch it!
That would be our confidential formula for compound V, which you, man-child that you are, released into the wild.
Genuinely so insane, and now that you guys know his history, you can see how he built up to this. Wow. I'm gonna be so honest, he's so, oh my god, such a daddy. I'm sorry guys, now we know Giancarlo's rise to the top was very step-by-step, very corporate. But what if we talk about a character whose come up was just so relatable and innocent? Let's talk about Laz Alonso, the man who acts out Mother's Milk in The Boys. His story begins 24 years ago, where he was a host at the AM at Bet show, where he'd simply just go around vlogging in New York City and creating generic fun little content for the company. Over time, this would give him the little exposure he needed to then start acting in music videos for pretty famous singers back in the day, like Toni Braxton in 1980s, then allowed him to finally break into traditional movies, but only as supporting roles in pretty bad movies. For example, this Leprechaun movie in 2003 has an 18% public rating, but at least we get to see how Laz started off. His acting back then already had a lot of expression, but it was very surface level. It didn't feel like he was putting his feelings into his dialogue, but his charisma would still carry him through. Keep pushing through these funny, giggy type of roles all the way up until 2009, where he'd get his first first big break, getting casted as the main bad guy for Fast and Furious. And here he made a big leap in his angry type of acting, which you can see through his facial expressions, the way he stared with the widened eyes, the way he learned to properly pause, which was already just a huge improvement from his little leprechaun movie, whatever the hell that was. And after Fast and the Furious, he just couldn't stop landing lead roles, because then he'd be one of the leaders in the Breakout King show and the main guy in Deception, both very strong roles that allowed him to further develop his tough man acting. What really made him stand out is, just like Giancarlo, he was a threatening but a laid-back individual, a type of talent not many actors can pull off, but his face, it just has it. And just 5 years after Deception, where he finally proved he could be a good but a nonchalant serious actor, Amazon Prime would call up Alonso as Mother's Milk in The Boys, bringing that same nonchalant threatening vibe all the way into the show. But sweethearts, I don't think we're juicy enough. How about we get really juicy? Let's get serious now. Let's talk about the main of the show, the baby girl himself, Antony Starr. And let me tell you guys, while researching for this video, I could tell he was already going to be successful at acting from the beginning. And let me explain to you guys why. His first ever acting experience was at 19 years old with Karl Urban in Xena Warrior Prince. Already you can see that look in his eyes. And it's cool that Antony himself even stated in interviews, whenever he does this creepy, unintentionally deadly eye look, it's simply just how his face looks. He's not even trying to do that. And this acting scene right here actually proves that for us. But there was still a lot of work to do, because after his entry, things would slow down quite a bit for him, and he would still just only land New Zealand based shows like Shortland Street and Terror Peak, both just roles you can kind of comb over, nothing impressive yet. But that would change in his first hit role in Outrageous Fortune. He's all the way now at 29 years old, and finally we got to see the foundation of his acting coming together. The body language was finally evolving and more rich. His facial expressions were also a lot more genuine, but you can still see, compared to Homelander, his facial expression, it's still holding back. He's not at the point where he's lashing out, but that lash out would arrive just 3 years later, in the beginning of a new era, the Banshee era, a 4-season TV show that was one of his first jobs outside of New Zealand. Something here finally clicked for him, and you can see in episode 4x7, he's lost that unconfidence and he's fully unleashed that Homelander we know today. The way his eyes are widening, the way he's clenching his jaw. He's always had that sinister look, but now he's put emotion behind it.
Said drop it! No, I'm not gonna drop it! I wanna know! Why are you here? Why did you become a cop? Hey, I'm not a cop! I never was a fucking cop! What does that mean? I'm not Lucas!
And the secret reason this role right here is what elevated Antony is because this role is the first time ever he was put in an authority police type of role. This role demanded that aggression for him. He was forced to step up. And so the reason he is so comfortable as Homelander now in 2019, 2024 is because he's been acting out somebody very much like him for many years before. That right there is the secret sauce. And so finally, when Amazon Prime hit his line in 2019, he had that vicious look. But as you guys can see, Antony's rise was pretty steady. It was kind of linear. So what if we talk about an actor who had a very bumpy ride to the top? Somebody who went through a lot of failures to make it as a star. Let's talk about Claudia Doumit, who acts out Victoria Neuman in The Boys. And she easily has the least amount of work experience compared to the rest of the cast, but still she somehow landed one of the main roles in the show. But how? How is that possible? Shh, don't worry, sweetheart. Let me explain. Claudia was born in 1992 in Sydney, Australia. Growing up, she mainly focused on acting classes, but still she got rejected from her dream acting school, NIDA, in Kensington. So she ended up resorting to a simple 2-year degree in Los Angeles. And that degree seemed to be enough to just get her through the door and into her first couple acting roles. The first one being MTV's comedy show, Faking It. And as you guys can now analyze, Claudia has always had that sarcastic look to her. And there's already many fascinating techniques like the way she looks away and back at that blonde girl. Combining that with the tone she talks, it's clear she already has this nailed down. But unfortunately, here's the sad part. It still wasn't enough to wow producers because things would die down for her after this role. For the next couple years, she'd only appear in a few different shows for only 1 episode each, such as New Girl, Mike and Molly. But finally, after that long struggle of just 1 episode, she'd make it into her big hit, Supergirl. She'd play a reporter named Beth, and you can now start spotting the resemblances between Neuman and Beth. She was implementing extra sassiness by using her eyebrows very well. And to be honest, it also just helps her a lot that her eyebrows are so thick, so it helps give out emotion. She also learned how to project her voice very properly here.
You're not sure what they say? Behind every great man is a strong...
Clearly, this era was magic for her because around the same time, she landed another phenomenal role in Timeless, which would be her first ever lead role as Gia. And this is actually a show I personally watched before and I very much enjoyed. A lot of you time travel people, I'm sure you'll love it. And this show itself was huge for her success because of two things. Firstly, the show itself was massive. It was huge, everyone was talking about it, which boosted her name. But secondly, it also allowed Claudia to play a more empathetic, caring person. Guys, remember, success in Hollywood comes down to how good you are at versatile roles. How many different types of things can you do? She was always the sassy reporter girl, but now things were changing. She wasn't screaming and being rude to blonde white girls all day, but she was in a tight-knit team of time travelers. She helped build the time machine with these people, and she went through struggles with them. And scenes like this show she was finally rounding out her passionate emotional side. Something that would help her tremendously just 3 years later when the boys would cast her out as Victoria. Scenes like this in season 4 show just how much she's learned and grown as an actor. The way she looks back at Homelander just slightly after her head tilts back. These are very small detailed things that truly make her stand out. Let's get a little freaky, sweethearts. Let's talk about someone with a crazy backstory. A crazy one. A man that was in a frat house and also in Hannah Montana. No, I'm being so serious. We're talking about Jesse Usher, the guy who plays Atron. His family moved to Los Angeles just for him because he had a passion for acting since he was 5 years old. His acting passion would lead to him landing a Hannah Montana role in season 2 for just a few seconds, which was still a big turning point for him because after this he'd also land a couple short roles in shows like Criminal Minds and The Mentalist, which were good things to pad up his resume, but the big important one would come in 2011. His past kid-friendly experience allowed him to land a huge lead role in Level Up, another Disney Cartoon Network type of show. And at this point he was actually 19 years old, and surprisingly you can see the acting was still pretty basic. The wide eyes for the comedy, the funny tone he talked with, it was good, but for someone that had been acting for a little bit at 19 years old, I expected a little bit more. But let me just shut my mouth because that would all change just a couple years after when he got casted for Survivor's Remorse, a show about a basketball star and all the difficulties that come with. Even though it wasn't a super popular one, the ratings for it were very high, and we got to see Jesse Usher in a much better light. He would now involve a lot more of his facial acting. He finally started using a lot more body language and it became a lot more natural for him. And I personally love this specific scene right here where he's arguing with his coach because you can truly see the strides he's making. The comedy funny tone, but also that sliver of a hint of the empathetic sad eyes. And just a couple years after this, the boys would announce his entrance onto the show. The same goofy comedy from Level Up is present in A-Train, but also those emotional type of talks we got to see in Survivor's Remorse. And that is the main history of every single actor in the show. But now that you have a full history of every actor in The Boys, you can watch this video that fully ranks how good each actor from The Boys actually is compared to each other. Make sure you guys subscribe. I love you guys so much. Deuces.